Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Red Pill, joined as always by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Benway, and we are going to be talking about a very interesting book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson. And from here, we're going to talk about the issue of public shaming, which is really interesting, and it's a new phenomenon, really, a rather startling phenomenon. And so, anyway, let's get to it. Dr. Benway, how's it going?
Going pretty decent. It's funny how you say this is a new phenomenon, because when I looked through this book, and it felt quaint. You know what I mean? It felt like a quaint catalog of an ancient time. By an ancient time, I mean the early 2010s. Yeah. You know, and I was looking through it, and it's the book as a whole. If you think of it as like, oh, it has a story and a point to be made, you know, cohesively, I'm like, oh God, by the second half, I'm bored with it. I don't care what he has to say in a big picture things. But in the small scale, like, let me give you several catalogs of interesting stuff that happened. Yeah. Half of which, like, I remembered. Yeah. Other half I was like, oh, you know, that was an interesting little side details, because he actually interviews the people who went through these shaming events. Yeah. You know, that was interesting. But, you know, but it also just feels of a time. I mean, like, it's not like shaming has stopped. God knows it hasn't stopped. Yeah. But like the take on it, you know, is quaint because it's a take on it that is pre, you know, Trump era society cleavage. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, okay, just to give a little preface of the book is written by a guy called John Ronson. And John Ronson is famous for having written another book called The Psychopath Test. He's one of these like Malcolm Gladwell kind of writers who sort of like popularizes science and stuff, and writes nonfiction in a very accessible way. I mean, Benway, you and I would agree that the book is an incredibly swift read. It's just crafted so well in terms of readability.
Yeah, and I don't even mean that by saying like John Ronson is, you know, the greatest writer you're ever going to encounter. It's just he's technically very proficient, and it's like the words are sized just the right way, the spacing is just the right way. The tempo. I mean, it's, you know, I think I spent less than a day's worth of time to read the thing. Yeah. Yeah, me too. And
it took me 3 days, and I had a busy 3 days, and it was just a breeze to read. It was a pleasure to read. And I have to admit that, see, I really like that ability, that craft, because as a writer, I know how hard it is to do that. It's really hard to do that, to write in such a fluid and just smooth way. It's such a polished way, but that doesn't really draw attention to itself insofar as the writing, because he doesn't really make an effort to say, ooh, I'm such a great writer. Because he's not like a great writer, but he has craft, and I respect that. But anyway, the organization of the book is, he devotes, it's basically, what is it here, 9 chapters, and in these 9 chapters, or excuse me, no, not 9 chapters, 15 chapters, my apologies. And each chapter sort of like goes through, it recaps an episode of a public shaming. Like the first one is with this guy, Jonah Lehrer, who was this, I forget, it was BuzzFeed, started off with BuzzFeed or Vice, and then graduated to the New Yorker. And he was caught to have plagiarized himself, which I don't know how big of a sin that is. But the more controversial aspect was that he made up a couple of quotes on Bob Dylan. Which it's...
and let's put it in context too. The book makes a big thing about like, oh, he was just fucking saying lies left, right, and center. We're talking about, you know, at the end of the day, just sloppy quoting. Yeah, like, you know, Bob Dylan's. You know, I think the quote of Bob Dylan, you know, it says like, uses one type of word, and he uses not necessarily a simile, but something that kind of conveys the same message. Right. And you know, it's just clear. Okay, he's going really fast and doing it from memory. So what? And then he even quoted something Bob Dylan said on a radio interview, which didn't happen, but I know that Bob Dylan had said things like it elsewhere. Yeah. So to me, it came across, okay, I get this guy. He's just going through things sloppy and like in a kind of rush to get this completed kind of way, which, yes, I get it. If you're in a book, it's not really proper. You shouldn't be doing that. But in human speech, you know, we do things like that all the time. But the funny thing was, this book, the incident, which you gotta love it. Some other newspaper writing guy or magazine guy who claims that he's like a down on his luck kind of guy, could never make money in writing, but I'm a Dylanologist. I just know what Bob Dylan does. I'm like, anybody who claims themselves to be a Dylanologist should,
sad.
I wouldn't say shot, because I don't want to be that cruel. I'll be charitably left wing. I think they should be gulagged. You know what I mean? It's so bad. And I love Bob Dylan too, but don't fucking call yourself a Dylanologist. Anyway, this guy says, hey, those words don't exactly sound like Bob. So he went on an autistic, trip down. Let me look through all these archives to find it. Yeah. And I he never really said it this way as Jonah said, says he did. So he starts questioning Jonah. And you remember, this is in the aftermath of the Steve Glass stuff, the A Million Little Pieces stuff, where people just outright faked. I mean, not just like, oh, I misquoted someone. It's like outright faked events that never happened, and reported them as real. And and you get this narrative of Jonah. Is it Jonah Lehrer or whatever? Breaking down. As he's being uncovered,
completely collapsing and having a complete meltdown. And what's interesting, okay, look, there was a couple of quotes. I'm flipping through the book as I'm talking. There were a couple of passages. There was one line where it was clear, or it seemed to me, that he must have written down the Bob Dylan quote and then added a note to himself, sort of recapping what Dylan had said. And then later on, he'd forgotten that he'd written that note and it wasn't an actual quote, and he just included it as a quote. But it was totally in the spirit of what Dylan had said. It was a trivial error. But this Lehrer kid, here's the interesting thing. He completely melted down over this shit. He was calling up the guy who spotted him, who spotted these errors 20 times, panicking. And instead of just blowing it off, it was weird. It was as if he wanted to destroy himself. And here's the other thing. Lehrer was an extremely successful magazine writer and lecturer. He was making a shit ton of money because of his writing, and he was a very young guy. And so clearly there was a lot of envy going on. Not necessarily perhaps by this guy who found him out, though I do suspect that was part of the driving motivation. But also a lot of the other people who buried Lehrer after the fact and just all pointed the finger at the guy, because they weren't really, it wasn't the sins that he committed. They were trivial. They were mistakes. And plagiarizing yourself, that is, writing some passage in a blog and then using that same passage in something else, I don't quite see the sin of that. Okay,
the worst you could say is that if someone paid you to, write that thing the second time, you'd say, "Well, I paid you to write something new." But that's something between those two folks, between us, the reader, and Jonah Lehrer. Who gives a fucking shit?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But yeah, it was from my take. I always said, look, this really is just a guy who was careless, and you could argue about his carelessness.
But what's interesting is that Lehrer set himself up to be executed. He was the lamb who docilely or hysterically went to the slaughter. He got all hysterical instead of just blowing it off. Because what's interesting in the book, Ronson talks about the head of Formula One, Max Mosley. Max Mosley is the head of Formula One, a very rich guy, and he has a very checkered history because his father was Oswald Mosley, the head of the Nazi party in Great Britain, right? And of course, pro-Hitler guy, right? And he was caught in some pictures of some dungeon sexcapade shit. Who gives a shit, right? And he just blew it off. He just could not give a shit, right? And it went away, okay? I mean, that's how you handle this shit. Just to
and there's another story about that, and I want to talk about that one. I'll hold off on that because you were wondering, why are we talking about this Jonah Lehrer incident? What's the shaming? Well, it happens later. So he gets caught out. Oh, mea culpa. I think at this time if he doesn't get fired by the New Yorker, at this point, he's soon. He resigns. It's soon to come. But there was an incident where he was already set to give a speech at some sort of media and tech event. I don't remember.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But they did something kind of despicable from my perspective.
Yes, they
which
did.
was as he's basically doing an apology speech, but he did it in a way which may not be the greatest, but I get where he's coming from, which is he starts with a sincere apology. Okay. And then he's trying to talk about it in the structure of how he would have written one of his books. And I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. He's just writing in his own style. You can hate his style. I do. But it's who he is, whatever. And what they did was have live tweets of the event on big screens behind him or to the side of him, so that he and everybody in this auditorium can see what the Twitterati were saying in response if they use the right hashtag.
Right.
He starts his apology. People are like, yeah, I think this guy's sincere. Good credit to him.
Then the trolls arrive.
But then the trolls arrive, and I got to go find some of the. I mean, typical shit. I mean, we're all on the internet. We all know what it gets like. And he's doing that as he's doing his fucking speech. He's just seeing this bullshit go by. Yeah. And that was what's the interesting part of the book, because you have some people said, oh, fuck it, he deserves it. But Ronson is looking at there. He's like, you know what? I'll go so far as to say, yeah, he committed a great writing sin, whatever that means. But to see this guy go through this, you're like, oh God, that's something horrific about it. Yeah. And it was also like whether he said it or not, I think there was a passage where it's like, could you just imagine yourself going through that? It was almost like a self preservation response, which is, God help us. I'm glad I wouldn't have gone through that. I don't know if I would have survived that. Sure. And his whole point was, there's something that happens to us when we are occupying a crowd like that, and we can just throw, the rotting tomatoes at people. And it's funny how you said this public shaming is a new phenomenon. The reality of the book is, like, this is ancient phenomenon. They even went back to the pre-founding and the founding of the United States, when you had perhaps one of the few times in my life when I'm in agreement with a Puritan pastor, when he says these public shaming events are barbaric. They have to stop. It creates this bestial response in the human heart when you're around this. And that's kind of like the take on the book. It was more above and beyond just people do bad things and they get shamed. It was what happens when you take the mass of individual people and they unite around this concept of, like, we're going to be, the proud, morally righteous people attacking these awful, awful people for doing these bad things. Yeah. And the other incident that was mentioned, I'm sure a lot of people in our audience would have remembered, is that her name's in the book. It'll come to my mind. It was the woman who, like a PR woman in New York, and she wrote a tweet when she was going to Africa that said,
"Hope I don't get AIDS.
I hope I don't get AIDS.
I'm white.
I shouldn't worry about it. I'm white." And it's clear what the joke was. Nothing. To me, it is like, oh, that's so trivial. She's on a plane, probably asleep, and obviously disconnected from the world. At that point, she had like 170 followers. This tweet blows up to thousands upon thousands of people either saying, you fucking cunt, you should die, to, this racism that exists everywhere. Shit show. We all know these kind of shit shows, right?
Yeah. Justine Sacco was her name. She was a PR chick. Her life was really ruined because she was a PR girl, and that those kinds of jobs are very okay. If you're a writer and a controversial writer, shit, you can still make a living as a writer by writing controversial shit. Jonah Lehrer is his name, I do believe. He's doing fine. He got a book deal and all the rest of it. But this Justine Sacco, she got fucked at the time of publication of this book. She really hadn't. Her life was not back together. What was interesting was that he was able to get interviews with all these people. Those are remarkable gets. I mean, you got to give the guy credit there. I mean, however
he was interviewing them in the time.
While it was happening. Yeah.
So like there's an interesting bit where he's talking to Jonah Lehrer after he's been publicly shamed and everything, and
you publicly buggered.
Buggered. Exactly. So he's like more or less alone in front of his family, and obviously his family life, his marriage is stressed. He hasn't had a job or what have you, and he's just got nothing but time to himself. And John Ronson is talking to him, and they said they're like going around walking in the, I guess either the canyons or the deserts around L.A.
The canyons.
And it's just you're just seeing a man eating with nothing to eat or consume but himself and his thoughts. Yeah, it's like you're in the wilderness, and like people. I mean, I'm sure everybody, if you haven't in your life gone through it, there will be a time, whether short or long, where you will go through it. Yeah, and it is
Very difficult.
Difficult. Perhaps in retrospect, you will find something to enjoy about it, but it's god awful period. And he's talking to these people in these times when they're they're post shamed,
Yeah.
and they just have to live with it. So I actually don't think Lehrer has produced a book or has written extensively since that incident. I mean, I could be wrong.
No, I do believe that he published a book. I'm looking at it as we're speaking. But look, it's pretty damn funny. It's funny because, see, this Wonderkind, he shot up like a meteor, right? Or wrong metaphor, but you know what I mean. And he shot up into the stratosphere, and then he just got knocked down so quickly. But the thing that's funny is that they sort of like went willingly. That's the thing. The only guy who got off scot-free from this public shaming was Max Mosley, who's like, I don't give a shit.
Two. The other guy, Mike Doherty or Mike Dorsey, the guy who did the app. He was Mike Daisey. Sorry, I remember that incident very well.
Which is that guy?
Mike Daisey was he was the guy who went on. He was the almost like Spalding Gray, the not lecture. What's that like? It's a specific type of performance where you're just telling your story.
Yeah. He's a Spalding Gray type of guy. Yeah. What about it? Which one was it?
Yeah. So he did that story about going to the Apple factory in Shenzhen, and
just
saying
making it up. He just made up the whole story.
Saying and everything. Well, he took real incidents, but made it seem like he was just constructing this narrative of reality. And then Ira Glass, the ultimate self-hating, American liberal Jew, says, "Oh, you just got to be on my podcast to say the story." And then he went through this, we should probably do some fact checking. And Daisey fucked around to basically say, I can't give you all this. And they said, fine, we go through it. So Mike Daisey's story on Apple goes on This American Life. People in the reality, who pay attention to these things said, wait, you have a moment in the story where you said these poor Chinese workers who are surviving this factory are making nothing and are being, basically physically deformed because of their work. You met them in a Starbucks. Do you know how fucking expensive it is for a normal Chinese person to be, to have coffee in a Starbucks? He's like, that doesn't make sense. And then they tried to track down the translator, who he said was untrackable. And they found her and she said, nah, none of this stuff really happened. And then the most awkward thing of all time, and I saw that, listened to this episode, I think it still exists online, where Ira Glass brings Mike Daisey into the studio and says, basically it's just a painfully awkward moment. We have this, like I said, the liberal self-hating Jew try to passive aggressively say to Mike Daisey, it's like, I stuck my neck out for you and you lied. And why'd you do this? And Mike Daisey finally breaks down in that episode, says, I'm sorry, like a broken man. But the next day he's like, defiantly said, no, fuck you. I'm a performer. This is what I do. It's my take on the truth. I mean, it's all bullshit, but I kind of sympathize with him and says, look, I know you're playing the artistic game. I get it. Most of the problem was fucking Ira Glass for being a lazy son of a bitch and taking your word for it. He should have been more like me, who just won't accept you as anything but a bullshit artist. But he was defiant and said, "No, fuck you. I'm not going to cave. It's you assholes who are attacking me, who are the pains in the ass." And he survived. He's fine. He had a couple of shaming days, but got through it. Didn't give it because he didn't give a shit. Just like the Oswald Mosley's son. And that's kind of like a theme you get from the book. Like if you just passively say, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I'm the worst person ever," people treat you like the doormat that you are.
Yeah, it's basically you ask for forgiveness of the crowd. The crowd is just going to want more blood. There was a striking metaphor I thought that I'd actually never heard it until this moment. I'm sure it's been used before this book, but it was the metaphor of the individual snowflake doesn't feel that he's to blame for the avalanche. Which is quite accurate. You don't have a problem throwing shit at somebody who you think said or did something despicable, but then and you exaggerate, of course. Like the woman, the Justine Sacco saying, hope I don't get AIDS. Oh no, I'm white. Which is sort of stupid. And everybody's saying, "Oh, you're the most evil person ever," and blah blah blah. No, she's not the most evil person ever. It's she just said something silly, something stupid.
She's not even in the top 500.
Yeah, exactly. And but everybody, millions of people saying you're the worst person ever. That is something else. that is, yeah, yeah. I've well, look, I've gone through.
And it was like, yeah.
I've gone through that kind of public shaming or the opprobrium of an in group or something like that. And yeah, of course, it's unpleasant. But the thing is, see, once you get through it and over it, you realize, oh, it's not that bad. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you have to understand. That if people thinking that you're horrible and all of them saying that you're horrible doesn't mean that you're horrible. It just means that they think that you are. But who gives a shit? They're strangers. They don't know you. So who cares what people think
Well, I
about
mean,
you?
like, think about it. It's like, what effort does it take to write a comment online that says, "Oh, you're a fucking asshole," or "You should do this my way," or "Why did you do it this way?" It's like, yeah, I listen to it. Sometimes I shoot shit back, and then I'm done. It's like, I don't give a shit. You put any fucking effort into anything other than typing for a little bit. Kiss my ass, kind of thing. But what's interesting about this is these are, in some sense, incidents where if it was just you and me dealing with people online calling us fucking pieces of shit, that's one thing. What's interesting about it in these cases, it's where you have institutions responding to this trivial patter online.
Mhm.
So like Justine Sacco, she was fired from her job, right? The other incident that came up in the book was a couple of, like, it was a tech conference, and it was two guys talking. They make some, basically some sex joke using using technical jargon. Like,
Yeah,
basically,
this is stupid.
I wouldn't put it. What was it? Something like dongle.
I wouldn't put my
kind of
dongle in that or something like that. Nothing
I wouldn't
stupid.
put my dongle in that repo or like repository. Basically, they're trying to simultaneously said I wouldn't use this guy. I wouldn't take this guy's software and use it for anything. And also say I wouldn't fuck him in the ass or something.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what it was.
Yeah,
and
stupid.
some bimbo in the crowd basically thought she was sexually threatened, and posted pictures of these guys and demanded action be taken, or I don't know what.
Action must be taken.
Or at the very least, they need to learn a lesson here, and so their company fired them.
Yeah.
And and then these guys
Adria
posted,
Richards, that was her name, Adria Richards.
And I want to read quotes from that because that's going to be a great chapter to talk about. But I just at the high level, I'll just do. They got fired, and then they posted in the forum and said, what the fuck? We got fired for this stupid joke. Then another Twitter mob got her fired.
Yeah.
For the same thing. And what's interesting to me is that you have these major companies, because when you have a lot of money at stake, you're primarily motivated by fear.
Sure.
That's how these corporate cultures work. Trust me on this one thing. And so they immediately think, uh-oh, Twitter is blowing up. I must stop doing.
I must cut off the cancer, whatsoever that cancer may be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's what's, to me, is the worst part about this current flavor of shaming, right? Because it's above and beyond my skill at dealing with a stupid crowd, or your skill at dealing with a stupid crowd. There's a third party in there, and it's the third party that's feeding you, funding you, what have you. And that's the thing that's, I think, everybody kind of gets scared of and worried about, because and the whole notion about doxing and everything. I mean, we've had friends or acquaintances online who've gone through it.
Yeah.
And in a way that it mattered more. Like, you and I've always said, it's not like, for you, it's not like someone's going to fire you.
No.
But other people, they could
get
fired. And that's the shit that makes this all very interesting, because you're trying. And I think that's even how Ronson starts the book, where it's like, it started off thinking like it's the good fight of the little people fighting against big corporations who, like, for example, wouldn't, I think it was LA Fitness wouldn't cancel the gym membership for a couple that lost their job, and they wanted to save the money, and they said, no, you have to pay the membership. And the crowd said, what the fuck is that for? Let them off, you greedy son of a bitch company. And they said, okay, fine, we relent. So he thought to himself, oh, the shaming is good. It's just basically the people standing up for their own. Well, guess how it fucking forms, per usual. We eat our own.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting here, though, going back a little bit to the, the Justine Sacco, who was the PR girl who did the AIDS joke, and Jonah Lehrer. There's something else. Actually, as we've been talking in this conversation now, I've been rethinking a little bit about Jonah Lehrer, and I looked at his books, and his books were. He has published a couple of books since this whole scandal. They have not been that successful. The thing is, see, this kind of writer depends on other writers thinking that he's good. and other writers blurbing him and keeping them on the pages of their publications and saying, oh, Jonah Lehrer just came out with a book, and they do a little piece for their magazine or their newspaper. And his career floats on the goodwill of his peers. So this public shaming, I was saying, oh, he was sort of stupid to have overreacted. But then on the other hand, thinking about it, it could be that he recognized how tenuous his career actually was, that it depended on other people's goodwill. And if that goodwill vanished for whatever reason, justified or not, he was fucked. And perhaps he was more realistic.
That's an interesting.
You see what I'm saying?
That's an interesting. It's an interesting. I think it's a tangent conversation, but I want to go there because it relates to something I think we were talking about when we first talked about discussing this book. I had at that point read the Jonah Lehrer part, the story, and I said to you, you know what? I would have been happier, or I would have been okay if people hated Jonah Lehrer just for the writer that he is, independent of those trivial mistakes. I think he's just part of that stupid Malcolm Gladwell type, of which John Ronson is also ironically part of, where they think they're profound writers. They're just regurgitating actual work done by actual people.
Yeah.
They verge into the self-help territory. They're empty calorie books. I think they should be purged from our diet. Not in a censorious way, but I just think, just like I would advise people, you don't spend your day eating candy bars. Don't spend your time reading those stupid Malcolm Gladwell-like books. And he was one. And I was more than happy for him to not be writing that shit. But I think your point kind of reemphasizes that as well, wouldn't it? That, hey, look, yeah, he may have got shamed for technical things, but the reality is those books are so slight that it's like a fad. And if you're part of a fad, it's you're just floating on the good graces of, popularity.
Yeah.
And if that popularity is fundamentally based on people thinking, oh, this is the smart guy who's going to tell me how to save my life, that can float away like it's just a castle made on sand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because look at, okay, I'm not comparing the two in any kind of way. I'm just bringing him up as an example. Good old Solzhenitsyn, my hero, right? Solzhenitsyn did the Gulag Archipelago, One Life of Ivan Denisovich, and all the rest of it. He shows up at the Harvard commencement and basically flips off the Western liberalism, right? That's essentially what the Harvard speech Solzhenitsyn gave was about. That the West is soft and decadent, right? But the thing is, see, his reputation, quote unquote, his stature, his whatever, does not depend on any one speech. He's just like an ocean liner. He just drives through the ocean, and the ocean sort of like, figuratively steps aside for him. I'm mixing my metaphors like crazy once again, but you know what I'm saying, right? Whereas Jonah Lehrer, he's tossed around by whatever passing little breeze. He's like a kite, whereas Solzhenitsyn is an ocean liner. So any little damage to his reputation is devastating, whereas any huge hit to his reputation, he won't even notice it. I mean, talking about Solzhenitsyn, you know what I'm saying? That
was what was interesting about this book, because you might remember when I talked about it, I was somewhat infuriated when I was getting through this story, because I said to myself, it would have been one thing. I was pissed off that he was broken for the wrong reason.
Right.
You know what I mean? If it would have been people,
I thought so too. Yeah. But now that I'm thinking about it,
people,
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like if people attacked him for you are a vapid, empty writer, that's the reason you attack him. But when it's like I said, the way the story went out, it was like, okay, he's a sloppy quoter and he's a lazy guy in some regards, probably because he's doing too many things at once. And, but it's motivated by a guy down on his luck, but thinks he's going to get a big scoop, and a guy who then realizes that he did something egregious to a person by basically ending his livelihood, and then tries to turn around and say, well, I only made $2,000 from that story, and this guy's still a millionaire.
I know. That was so pathetic.
It was so humanly pathetic, this whole little story.
Yeah. But hang on. Let me flip it around. Oh shit! The point slipped my mind. But going back to the writer who took him down, he was so mealy mouthed and pathetic.
I'm gonna look for this section because he goes into this fucking thing.
I know. He went into this thing of like, oh, I thought about it so hard, I didn't know if I should do it or not, and I thought, and then when I finally sent the email, then I was like crying, and I went to my wife and I tore my hair out and then, put on the hair shirt, and it was all this bullshit, It's just so this lack of moral self-confidence, or let me phrase it, this pretense of moral insecurity, when ultimately it was just about fucking up some guy you didn't like. Okay, I respect a guy who says, I'm gonna fuck him up because I don't like him. I can respect that. I can get behind such a man. I'm like, yeah, I'm there. Maybe I agree with you, maybe I don't, but there's also something else. And I recall the point. What happened? I think that everybody turned on Jonah Lehrer because I think it could be perhaps that everybody recognized that the books that he was writing were fundamentally trivial, but they didn't have the self-confidence to say these are trivial books and this guy is a trivial writer, so let's just fuck him. Let's throw him overboard. They needed some justification, some higher justification, a moral justification. And especially in the culture that we live in today, where there are no moral standards, or at least no objective moral standards, people grab onto any moral justification that they can latch onto. That's sort of like semi-sticks. That he plagiarized himself and made up a couple of tweets. Trivial, morally inconsequential. I mean, it doesn't even rise to benign sin. Okay.
Yeah, and that's what Moynihan's take was. He churned it around from, this guy lied to, well, you know what? I'm just a poor schlub writer who can't make it, and this is a guy who has a multi-million-dollar house.
Are you
and
quoting?
All I can make is a measly. I'm remembering. I'm finding the bit here where he's talking about.
Moynihan. Yeah, I didn't. Look, that kind of autism. It's usually motivated. It's a autism that we've seen countless times before on 4chan, on 8chan, where they just want to fuck somebody up. That's what it is. It's just like, okay, this fucker. I'm gonna dig. I'm gonna dig and dig and dig and dig, and I'm gonna find something, anything. I don't care how trivial it is. I'm going to find something to stick it to the guy because I don't like him.
Well, this is how Moynihan
trolling. Yeah. That's what Moynihan was doing.
Huh? Well, this is how Moynihan kind of articulates it. This is in the aftermath of Jonah Lehrer's speech, his apology where he goes into his framework and everything. He says, fuck off. You can't even do your apology without sliding it into some stupid Jonah framework, Michael Moynihan said to me over lunch at Cook's shop in New York City. Michael shook his head in wonder. That wasn't an apology. It was a string of Gladwellian bullshit. He was on autopilot. He was a robot. Let me get to the study from some academic. All the words he used to describe his dishonesty. It was like a thesaurus had landed on his head. Michael paused. Oh, he said, someone sent me a text. I thought he was reading way too much into it. But he called me out. He pointed out to me that Jonah had said, I lied to a journalist called Michael Moynihan. I love that. I said, yeah, I see what you're saying. He didn't lie to journalist Michael Moynihan. That's the great trick of the language. A journalist called Michael Moynihan. Who's this fucking schlub? Michael took a bit of his stake. The fact was, his was a great scoop. It was great journalism. And what did Michael get from it? Some congratulatory tweets, which probably gives you a bit of dopamine rush or something, but otherwise nothing. $2,200 plus a veiled insult from Jonah if Michael and his friends weren't being paranoid about that part. Michael shook his head. Nothing came out of this for me. In other words, so this is a situation, right? And this, keep this in mind because it's a common occurrence in a number of these stories that Ronson tells. Moynihan is in his own mental model, frankly, a shitty writer, certainly a shitty writer in terms of making money off of it. He, doesn't have a lot of money. He lives in a shitty apartment, all these other things. And now he goes, oh, I'm going to take down this big fucking guy. And it's like, oh, and he frames it all. And like, I'm the little guy. And look, he doesn't even think I'm worth the effort, but look what I did to him kind of thing. And he has the moral ambiguity of, oh, should I have ruined a man's life? But never kid yourself. These are actions of people who in many ways in their life are broken. And they need to fix it somehow. Yeah. Or they need to evolve the world around them to make it seem like their failure is, or their weaknesses are a path to, are either a virtue or a path to success. Yeah. And it's funny because in the aftermath of this, I looked up, Michael Moynihan, and he's doing quite well for himself. I mean, he's got his own podcast. He's writing regularly, I think, for Vice, all these other kinds of things. Like, so this whole notion that he's a fucking schlub, compared to that, I mean, don't fucking kid yourself. I mean, he's doing quite well. But that note, but probably maybe at the time he was. Let's accept that. But he wasn't a Jonah Lehrer. I wasn't writing for the New Yorker. I'm resentful of
Yeah,
someone who
because
is.
ultimately, this use of shame is by resentful people, people who don't have it so good, people who envy the ones who are most successful, because the ones who are being targeted by this shaming are the successful people, or the ones who are perceived as successful. They're not targeting the people who are doing semi shittily. No, it's the people who are making it. Like Justine Sacco, for instance, this PR woman, she had a very good job. She was making a lot of money and living a fairly glamorous life, okay, or at least what passes for glamour and success in New York City, in her class, right? And yeah, she got taken down. If like you or I had said the exact same thing, nobody would have given a shit. Nobody would have. It would not have been picked up. It was the fact that she was this bright, shiny New York girl with a high profile job, not necessarily a great job, not necessarily a great life, but the perception of a great life, and everybody fell on her. They just wanted to eat her alive. I mean, the piranhas came out in force and they gobbled her up alive.
Yeah, she had a year. She had at least a year in the wilderness before she was finally able to get another job. And what was funny, they bring this up. John brings this up in the book, which I thought was a good point. And it relates to what you're saying, because what you're saying is essentially, look, Americans love the fall of the great hero. We love to see people who can achieve big things taken down a notch, because it reminds us that we're all human. Even people who are successful have dirt under their fingernails, and if they can fall down, it means that, well, you and your fallen state, it's not so bad, because anybody can get up and fall by the whims of fate. What's funny to me about that is what is kind of articulated as what Ronson says when they people, because it took her a year in the wilderness to finally get a job. She gets a job, and then people are tweeting in response actually to John Ronson's book when it got published that, oh, she's a racist bitch, and look, she got a job after a year anyway. What did she suffer? I'm like, you try being out of
Yeah.
your fucking position for a year and not knowing if it's just going to be a year. See how fucking easy it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you're in that situation where you don't know if this is just one more day of unemployment, or one more year, or one more decade of unemployment. I mean, you got to understand also too, in PR, you have a very finite window insofar as your career. You're in your early 40s, and if you haven't made it to a C-suite, you're done. That's it. The machine just spits you out, and you have to go hunt for jobs. I don't even know where old PR people go once they've been spit out of New York. I mean, do you know? I actually don't. I'm asking sincerely.
Where do old PR people go to die? Is that
Yeah, where do old
where
PR?
do they go to Galapagos? I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. Is
I
there
don't know either.
is there like an elephant graveyard for old PR people? I don't know.
Yeah, we put them on an ice. They get put on an iceberg up the Hudson River, and they find their way to Buffalo, I guess.
They go to Buffalo to die. Oh, that's great. Good to know. Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, really, seriously. And also, there's something else here. This woman was like 30s, in her mid late 30s, right? No children, of course, and what's she gonna do? She's got no family, nobody to care for her. You know?
Oh, that was the other
Oh
thing
man.
that was phrased. The thing that I always thought was how cruel a family, and they must have been a liberal family. She acted, and the way she described it, it made it seem like the family felt that she brought shame on them.
Oh
Like,
God. Oh God.
just imagine that. Imagine that. Not only do you,
I missed
like,
that
to your
part,
point,
or I must have
yeah,
I
yeah,
skipped
yeah.
it.
No, she never. It's not like they quoted lines from the family saying she brought shame on us, but the way she describes situations, she even phrased it like she felt she brought shame on the family. I'm like, if the family's response to this situation is that, and to your point, if this girl also doesn't have any kids or any future on that, I'm like, no wonder she probably thinks that her job is everything, and no wonder she never had kids, because if this is the way that the family is going to respond to their own being in such a position, how disgusting and
Yeah.
despicable. I'm like, it's like I slightly tangential but related. I do not have any disrespect for family members who say, even if your son killed someone,
Hmm.
or even if he was a serial killer, you're like, he's still my son.
Right.
And I respect that.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as it could be, even if you know your kid's guilty, like, no, I stand by my son.
You heard about Jeffrey Dahmer's father, right? He wrote a book that was trying to understand him, understand his son. His son was always complicated. I'm looking for it now. Lionel Dahmer is the name of the father. And he wrote a book about his son, and he was trying to understand it, trying to understand what you call it, his own son, and you don't blame him for it. And you even when he says that he loved his son, even though his son was literally a necrophiliac cannibal.
A homosexual necrophiliac cannibal. Let's get specific.
Yeah, I mean, like, Jesus Christ, you can't get any worse than that. He's gay, and he likes to fuck their corpses and eat the corpses. How bad can it be? Okay, I mean,
well, you got to say he's very efficient with his
with his sexual fetish. Yeah. But okay,
from soup to nuts, I get it all done.
Oh yeah, but the thing is, you don't blame.
Oh
Lionel.
God, that has a double entendre. I didn't even realize till afterwards.
Oh God, that was why it was funny. Jesus. Anyway, look. In a serious note, Lionel Dahmer saying that he loved his son in that book. Okay, nobody could think ill of him. Of course he would, even if his son was a monster because he was. I'm sure Hitler's mother, had she lived long enough to see all that her son did, would have said, there, Adolf, it's not so bad. And, Adolf is a good boy, of course, because your parents are supposed to love you. And I see with my own children that, of course they do things that I'm not 100% on, but I love them anyway. Well, of course, not to the notion of just cannibalism and genocide, but okay, I mean, they're too small yet. Yeah. But, you see what I'm saying, right? So the notion that Justine Sacco's family would feel ashamed of her for a fucking tweet like that. Talk about virtue signaling to strangers. The virtue signaling to strangers is more important than protecting and nurturing and succoring your flesh and blood. That's fucking psycho. That is so wrong on so many levels. You know what I mean? Jesus Christ.
Exactly. I mean, it's and it's the nature of, I guess, why this public shaming is so strange.
But hang on a second.
Not even.
Go ahead.
I was saying what makes it so strange. It isn't even that the shaming in itself is weird, which it certainly is. It's the way people respond to it, because it teases out other challenges with the society that we're in. Right. Like I said, if Justine Sacco's family is responding in that way, like, oh my God, she's a shame to us because we're embarrassed in front of our liberal friends.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting your liberal friends, how you look in public, above your child.
Yeah.
That's
But
exactly.
Here's something I want to talk about, specifically shaming. I mean, shame in our society. How can you feel shame or be shamed when you live in a society that practically accepts anything? What are the things, therefore, that you should be ashamed of? They're arbitrary, aren't they?
Well, they are fundamentally arbitrary, but that you're in this dynamic where everything is permitted, and then and simultaneously nothing is truly permitted.
Yeah, exactly.
By that, I simply mean, yes, any sort of. It depends on your categories, right? Any sort of fulfillment of your material desires is encouraged. Any suggestion of judgment on this, or trying to have a bigger worldview than that, is worthy of shame. Think about it. Like, anybody who were to say, like people with the fucking Christian bakery, right? You articulate Christianity in your life and how you operate in your day to day. You're a fucking judgmental asshole. You should be crucified. You should bake that motherfucking cake. Why? You can't get a cake elsewhere? All this person has done was say, you know what, in my little world, I am going to construct this moral view where I actually have a code of ethics in my life, and I'll do what I will, and I won't do other things. That's not allowed. You take it any other path. Any sort of attempt at cohesiveness, because cohesiveness makes things cohesive because it says certain, you won't do certain things. And whenever that certain thing you won't do is something practiced by someone else, they think that, you've just shattered. If you haven't shattered their worldview, you've made judgment on them to make them, consider, oh, am I doing the right thing? That cannot be permitted. You know what I mean? Like, take for the Sacco joke, right? The whole joke was that, hey, you know what? I'm a white person. I'm not worried about. I don't have to worry about all these things. Ironically, it's a left-wing position and joke, but the fact that, oh my God, the reality of it, fuck you, how dare you, all of that kind of stuff. People, and I don't know even if there's logic behind it, but all of these people who have been shamed, it's usually shamed or often shamed around having a set of judgments. And people just don't let you or want you to have those judgments. And so you'll be shamed into ever having them again.
Well, hang on. There's something else, too, here. See, all of these people are left-wingers, except for Max Mosley, whom I presume is right-wing. I actually don't know. But all of them were left-wingers. If you get right down to
or
it.
Apolitical.
Or apolitical, but friendly to the left-wing intelligentsia. Or partaking in the left-wing intelligentsia.
Right.
And it could be that this public shaming is strictly a left-wing thing. Because since they don't have and reject a fixed moral standard, then it becomes just arbitrary. It's like whatever you said that just doesn't strike the fancy of the mob. You see what I'm saying?
Well, no, the shaming and stuff has been in the right-wing wheelhouse, and it's coming back to it. So, for example,
no. I'm talking now. I'm now because now.
Yeah, and even now, think about I say that in quotes, got James Gunn fired from Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It was shaming to do that.
Yeah, but like for instance, like on the right wing, like with right-wing people, because we got James Gunn fired because just we wanted to tit for tat over Roseanne, right? But what about, like, for instance, a right-wing guy in the right wing, Trump? Trump fucks around. Everybody knows that, okay? Nobody said shit. Nobody brought it up. Nobody shamed him. Nothing, okay?
What about Mundane Matt?
Mundane Matt? Well, no, he was a piece of shit. It was different because he violated a sin of the community, which is to false flag people. No. Think about
potato.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, because what happens is that in our community, we all recognize that we have this weakness that any fool can flag us and kill our channel potentially, and so false flagging is a serious thing. We don't have a problem flagging other people. Okay, we have a problem false flagging or flagging because of shit that they're saying, but that nothing that they're actually doing. For example. In my own case, I flagged an Amos Yee pro-pedophilia video. And I flagged something else, but I don't know what it is because it said that video was removed. But it didn't. But it also removed along with it what title it was, and I frankly forgot. The videos that have attacked me personally, and they're myriad, I've just ignored them. I just ignore them. I could care less. I'm not going to false flag them, right? I would only false flag somebody if they who attacked me, if they ripped off my content and were making money off of it and were not actually using it to criticize me. If they're using my videos and footage from my videos to make fun of me and they add to it, I'm fine with it. I don't care. Because in our community, the guideline is tacit but very clear. Don't false flag because we're all equally vulnerable in that.
Well, no, here's what I'm asking you to be critical about. What you've just gone through is an exercise in justification. It's still publicly the actions and the narrative structure and the sort of this happens, then this happens, then this happens still fundamentally follows the public shaming principle. We just feel it's justified in what we're doing. I guarantee you the left, when they do this, feels justified in what they're doing, and I'm pretty sure they can argue.
Okay, fair enough. But
so my take on this is that, look, this is a tactic that every side is going to use, regardless of their
they're
politics.
using it more and more, yeah.
And yeah, for sure, it's going to be used more and more because they see that it's effective.
Yeah,
and that's what to me is the interesting thing: the fact that it's even effective at all. In part because, like I had said before, if it's one thing, it's like we're shooting the shit. Like you shoot the shit at Sargon shoots the shit at you, and if it never rises above the level of shit shooting, fuck. The only thing to be worried about is whether or not you feel you can handle it or not.
Right.
When it starts entering, like, oh, we're going to get into the level of threatening you and your, either your identity or your livelihood or all of those other things, then we're dealing with a world who thinks that the shit talk is serious. That's the reality of what I think. If you're only going to take a lesson from this book, it's that we live in a world where people think shit talking is something that should be taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that, well, with the Thomas Gunn thing, the right has finally figured out how to use the shaming thing. But
That's why I say that this book felt quaint.
yeah, but the thing is, see,
Because yeah,
the shaming on the right, they can only do it with certain topics like pedophilia, for example. Because when they try to shame people for inconsistency, which is when they try to shame them for logical inconsistency or incoherence, it doesn't get anywhere. Okay. It always has to be a recourse to some common standard. And at this time, the only common standard that crosses right and left is we all pretty much agree that pedophilia is wrong. And that's why it worked. If it had been
for the time being.
yeah, for the time being, yeah, because the left is fucking working very diligently in normalizing pedophilia. Sick fucks.
Well, you brought up a good point. Public shaming really can only work against a taboo. If you've broken what is a perceived taboo, then yes, the shaming function will work. So that's why you couldn't shame Jonah Lehrer for saying, "Oh, he's writing shitty books."
Right.
Well, that's
they're
not
all
a fucking
writing
taboo.
shitty books.
Yeah, it's all shitty books. Oh my God, you lied in the book or you misquoted. Oh, that's a sin.
Yeah.
That's a sin. And they describe it as sins. Oh, you made a racist comment. That's a sin. That's a sin. Oh, you made a sexually suggestive comment. That's a sin. That's a sin. That's the only way it works. Right?
Yeah. And the fact that it's the in group. It's basically the in group, or the group that you want to belong to or aspire to belong to. And because the standards are so flexible, the moral standards today are so flexible, so malleable. Then it has to be enough people who clamor about one specific thing. Because you can have other people like fucking, Bill Clinton, for crying out loud. He raped a bunch of women and certainly sexually abused other women, starting with Monica Lewinsky. And nobody's saying shit, because not enough people, there's not enough, there's no moral tipping point, to borrow a phrase from a writer we know, to have Clinton be accountable, and the fact that he was attacked by the right, because if Bill Clinton had been a Republican, he would have been fucking crucified. I mean, it would have been just but the left is so hypocritical. That's the thing. That's the thing that drives me nuts, and I think that a lot of conservatives feel the exact same way. It's not the moral malleability; it's the hypocrisy. That's what drives us nuts. At least drives me nuts. I don't know about you.
Well, but was it like it's interesting? I was thinking about the Bill Clinton example relative to the other guys we had in this book who survived they basically said were defiant, not giving a shit. Well, that was kind of Bill Clinton too. He was fundamentally defiant. He questioned the meaning of the word "is."
That was pretty
very
brilliant.
Famously, it was brilliant. And then his wife said, "There's a vast right-wing conspiracy against us." They both survived from this.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. Or when, for example, when they tried to shame Trump with the pussy grabbing comment.
Yeah.
He's like, it's locker room talk. Fuck you. Here's the women who Bill Clinton raped.
Yeah. And put them in it. Yeah. Well, here's some, quickly to go back to the book. Okay. The book is really great when it's talking about specific people and interviewing them and getting their stories across. And he interviews a lot of people, right? I mean, he's got a little bit of a genius for that, of being at the right place at the right time to get them to talk to him. Then he goes into the second half where he's talking about like some self-help group that's basically just their idea of self-help is just say exactly what you think whenever you think it, which I thought was the dumbest thing ever. Because shit, you cannot have a civil society when people are saying exactly what they think all the time. You're going to wind up with people killing each other. But anyway, the second half of the book sort of like petered out. And what was infuriating about the book was that he refused to take any kind of moral stance, any kind of, he refused to take a moral stance. I mean, that's the thing. He's
Well, he wanted to have it both ways because he depicted himself as a character in this book.
right.
Because he's that type of author. He starts out with saying how he would love to do it. Like, for example, those guys who created a bot, the John Ronson Twitter bot, and they were very Pomo kind of guys. And he posted a video of him talking to them, saying, "Take down my bot." And people, his response to that video were so overwhelming that the guys basically got shamed and got it away. And so John Ronson says, "Well, when I do it and I feel morally justified in doing it, I like that. But when I see other times when it's done and it seems like mean, I don't like that. So I don't know."
Yeah, exactly.
Decision. That's the ironically enough, that's the fundamental postmodern condition, which is you're too afraid to take a decision because you're worried about having to caveat everything, that you basically are indecisive.
Yeah, that's pretty much on the money. There's a lack of moral self-confidence, an inability to say this is good, this is bad. Because when you have moral self-confidence, that does not mean that you cannot be sympathetic to a person who has committed transgressions. That's not it. You can be perfectly sympathetic and yet think that they fucked up. Okay, you can make a moral judgment about somebody and still feel sympathetic towards them. And you can feel sympathetic towards them to the degree by which you know that you yourself, under certain conditions, could easily make the same decisions. Okay, if you're humble enough to recognize that, then you can be sympathetic, but without rescinding your moral responsibility. And which is interesting because I think that fundamentally Ronson is a psychopath or sociopath or whatever. He is not able to see himself as one of his characters. He can see them, but it struck me that all of his characters, the people who he portrayed them on a surface level, exterior. He could not genuinely see himself in them. He lacked empathy, which is pretty fucking funny if you think about it, considering who he is. He wrote the book, The Psychopath Test.
Right.
And I think that was kind of interesting, of a fundamental lack of empathy, because I look at Jonah Lehrer, and you and I, we've talked about him enough, that it's quite obvious that both of us understand him very well, and we are sympathetic to him. Or like the Justine Sacco with the, I'm white, I'm not going to get AIDS, right? It was a stupid joke. Or with somebody that we both despise, Michael Moynihan, right? Because I think that you and I are in agreement that he's a despicable character, right? But
absolutely.
But we understand him. We can understand him, and even as we understand him, find him morally despicable. Okay, because I can understand perfectly well being down in the dumps, having no money, having a young family, small children, desperate for money, working my ass off and getting more or less nowhere. I can understand that completely. Okay. And then, when he does this whole, this bullshit, oh, should I send it or not send it, mealy mouth bullshit, fuck off. I mean, I can understand him and still find him morally contemptible. Because like I said before, if the guy had simply said, fuck it, I'm going to destroy this fucker and I don't give a shit. Okay, I can get behind that. I can get behind ruthlessness. I can get behind a guy who's like, fuck it, damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead. You know what I'm saying? But
and that's why I kind of told that story. He's unself-aware that he is using this as a self-actualization exercise. It's like, not only are you going to get something monetary out of it, you're going to justify the fact that and at least John Ronson was smart enough to notice it. He referred to himself as a schlub relative to Jonah Lehrer every time that the guy fucking talked about him.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because he saw Jonah Lehrer as just a polished guy. Let me see. Where did Jonah Lehrer go to? I mean, he must have gone to like a good school and, the whole thing. Upper middle class.
He was a Rhodes Scholar.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah. He was. He went to Columbia U. He majored in neuroscience. Sure, that's a stepping stone to med school, right? And Oh, wow. He worked in the laboratory of some guy called Eric Kandel, who's highlighted in Wikipedia, so it must be a big deal. I mean, yeah, this guy had all the right the right pedigree. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that was the thing. What I'm mentally stumbling a little bit, but there's just
it's envy.
yeah, that's exactly right, and it's
Envy.
not truly, we're using shaming, or at least in this book, and this is partly why I say it's quaint, because I think shaming now is used as a political tactic.
Yeah,
But in this book, the case studies in this book are in some ways pathetic, because they are a manifestation of envy and using shaming techniques and this pretense, this hypocritical pretense to a moral code, to try to take back or take from someone which they by they I mean the shamers feel was given unfairly.
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And in fact, the story about the dongle guys,
Sure. Yeah.
The woman who accused them was basically, if Jonah goes, or not Jonah, I keep mixing John Ronson and Jonah, probably because I think fundamentally they're the same type of creature. But at least
They are.
I think John Ronson writes better books, but that's just my personal take on that.
I've actually never read Jonah Lehrer.
I've read enough to know I don't want to read more.
No, they're both the same kind of guy. They're upper middle class Jewish, magazine writers who have a knack of being in the right place and the right time and talking to the right people to make these very facile books that do very well, and that in 20 years their names will be less than trivial questions. And in 50 years, nobody will remember at all. Their writing is inconsequential. It's chewing gum. It's literary chewing gum. It's fun chewing gum. I mean, I had a good time reading the book. I'd recommend it, sure. Just as I'd recommend the Psychopath Test, which had a few interesting tidbits. But but do I think that they're valuable writers? No.
No. Yeah, and it's to the point when, if you ask me if I were to recommend this publicly shamed book, like a little bit, but not wholeheartedly for that reason. But here's the bit I was kind of looking for, which kind of hits to your envy point, or at least I interpret this as envy. You can tell me whether I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
This is when John Ronson is first talking to Adria, the woman who basically said that the guys made their stupid joke was a threat. He says, she goes, "Have you ever had an altercation at school and you could feel the hairs rise up on your back?" She asked me. "You felt fear?" I asked. "Danger," she said. "Clearly my body was telling me you are unsafe." Which was why, she said, she slowly stood up, rotated from my hips, and took 3 photos. She tweeted one with a very brief summary of what they said. Then I sent another tweet describing my location, right? And then the third tweet was the conference's code of conduct. "Danger?" I said. What were you imagining might ... She says, "Have you ever heard that thing? Men are afraid that women will laugh at them and women are afraid that men will kill them," she said. I told Adria that people might consider that an overblown thing to say. She had, after all, been in the middle of a tech conference with 800 bystanders. "Sure," Adria replied, "and those people would probably be white, and they would probably be male." That seemed a weak. This seemed a weak gambit. Men can sometimes be correct. There is some Latin for that kind of logical fallacy. It's called an ad hominem attack. When someone can't defend criticism against them, they change the subject by attacking the criticizer. Quote, he's saying this to her. "Somebody getting fired is pretty bad," I said. "I know that you didn't call for him to be fired, but you must have felt pretty bad." "Not too bad," she said. She thought more and shook her head decisively. "He's a white male. I'm a black Jewish female." He was saying things that could be inferred as offensive to me, sitting in front of him. I do have empathy for him, but it only goes so far. If he had Down syndrome and he accidentally pushed someone off a subway, that would be different. I've seen things where people are like, "Adria didn't know what she was doing by tweeting it." Yes, I did. This is the manifestation of an envy. complex, right? I
Yeah.
mean, she even phrases it as like a societal envy, because at the end of the day, she did not look at the person who is making this joke as a human being with the history and details and flesh and blood in front of her.
No.
She's looking at him as an abstraction against what she completely hates.
Yeah.
And later in this book, they go into her story of how her father was a fucking disgusting creature, and I think beat the shit out of her mother and other things. I'm trying to find that passage, but you could tell that those
So a
actions she
severely
took.
damaged girl.
Yeah, a damaged woman. Yeah, these actions, this shaming was the rantings of a damaged woman.
Yeah. Who wanted revenge.
And yeah, and wanted revenge and jealousy against people who, maybe they were lucky in being successful, maybe they weren't, but or maybe they had unfair advantages to her. I don't really know. I don't give a shit. But yeah, she was going to punish them, and you were the idiots that just happened to be in her way.
Yeah, because like, look, it goes back to this whole issue of the end of American apartheid and the integration of white and black society during the late 50s and 60s. It created this culture of victimization, and other interest groups found it useful to adopt this culture of victimization, and so it's just exacerbated offense and envy and resentment and hatred, and it's the end of the American apartheid system. I think people historically, retrospectively, are going to see it as catastrophic because it, released the hounds, released the kraken, call it what you will. It just opened up a can of envy and resentment that has nothing to do with the other group, the white people or whatever. It has everything to do with your perceived failure in relation to other groups. Because this black Jewish woman, right, who had a shitty life and all the rest of it, okay, that's a terrible thing that she lived through, that her father beat the shit out of her mother, blah, blah, abusive household, all that. Okay, whose fault is it? Hmm?
Certainly not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and for where this is going to end up, all you have to do is see South Africa. I finally found the passage where they're talking about Adria's backstory. I will read it just because I think it's useful for the context.
Shoot.
Adria's father was an alcoholic. He used to beat Adria's mother. He hit her with a hammer. He knocked all of her teeth out. Her mother finally took her children and moved out. But for Adria, things got worse. Going to school was hard, Adria wrote on her blog in February 2013. No shit, school is hard. That was me interjecting. The kids would tease me. I felt ashamed. Adria ended up in foster care. She sent me a letter she'd written to her father. It's Adria. How are you doing? I know it's been a very, very long time. I want to see you. I love you, Daddy. I'm 26 years old now. If you get this, please contact me, as I really would love to see you. Her father didn't write back. She hasn't heard from him in decades. She thinks he's probably dead. When I asked Adria if her childhood might have influenced the way she'd regarded Hank and Alex, she said no. They say the same thing for rape victims. If you've been raped, you think all men are rapists. She paused. No, these dudes were straight up being not cool.
Yeah.
Not cool.
Yeah. Resentment and anger and just a shitty life and just lashing out at somebody.
Yeah.
Who said something stupid,
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to comprehend how, because I have not gone through that damage thing.
No, yeah, neither have I. But the worst part is, of course, see, it's not that they said something stupid. No, they were saying silly things to each other. She overheard them, okay? It's not that they stood up and said this shit in front of everybody. They were just having a laugh while they were listening to somebody boring, and they were having a laugh between themselves. It was a private conversation. It took place in a public setting.
Which she felt she had the right to.
Yeah, exactly. That's the worst part. She went looking and snooped into a private conversation to find offense. Okay, what's that if not the attitudes of somebody resentful and full of hatred and anger that is just looking for a place to land? It's like a.
It's solipsistic too, because by solipsistic I mean egocentric and everything. She's conceiving of the world that can only be understood in her specific context.
Exactly, as if everything that happens around her is aimed at her, and she does not imagine that people have an independent existence, that they are doing things that have nothing to do with her. It's fundamentally juvenile.
Yes,
and that's something I want us to do in another episode, is talk a little bit about the perpetual adolescence of of our society and how it encourages perpetual adolescence. And the problem is that, the adolescent mind, the adolescent behavior is solipsistic and pulls shit like that. But that's going to have to be for a different episode, because we've tried the patience of our listener long enough, and so we are going to.
I love how you said listener. I love listener, because that's the reality.
We
hi,
have,
listener.
Hi, listener. You're our one guy. You're the one guy listening to us. Because we look at the metrics, we know you're there. And we notice when you don't listen to us. And we feel hurt. Our feelings are hurt. And we're gonna shame you. We should totally shame our listener.
How dare you listen to these bunch of Nazis?
Yeah. No, how dare you not listen to this pair of Nazis? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's right.
So anyway,
would you? Silly question, I know, whatever, but I want to ask it. Would you actually recommend this book to people?
As chewing gum, sure.
Yeah, that's the right.
If it's. Look, this is a fun, smooth afternoon's read for like a rainy day. It doesn't tax your mind. It doesn't make you think too much. We didn't talk about a few things that were kind of interesting, like for instance that organization that specializes in scrubbing people's reputation online. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
About that girl, who had done that stupid picture at Arlington where she'd flip the bird.
Yeah, kind of like flipped off.
Flip the bird at some sign saying, be quiet and respectful in Arlington Cemetery. And she was just a kid. She was just doing something stupid, and everybody threw a hissy fit, right? And I mean, it's something like that. It's like, sure. At first you're like, whoa, but then you like look at her and you realize she's young and just stupid, and just ignore it. And I think that we didn't talk about something that's kind of interesting to me, which is the notion that, if you are offended, if you take offense, you are fundamentally showing how weak you are. I'm talking about in the individual sense, because here we've been talking about the social sense of shaming and taking offense, right? But in the individual sense, I'm actually going to do a video about this. So yeah, I'll save it for the video then, and you all will see it then. But anyway, we're going to call it podcast. This has been the Coach and Benway Show. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and this is Coach Red Pill signing off for Dr. Benway. And Dr. Benway, do you have a final thought before we send off our listener into the great yonder of the interwebs?
Well, I'm in a good mood today because I'm white and I'm not going to get AIDS.
Yes, and I too am white and I'm not going to get AIDS. So if you are white and you're not going to get AIDS, even if you do have AIDS and are not white, have a happy day and take it easy.